All right, so it looks like we're recording podcast number 2. I am Daniel Lawrence in Southern Maine, high school level. I'm a phys ed teacher, and I currently coach indoor and outdoor track and field for 9 through 12, co-ed, and been doing that for about 12 years.
All right, I'm Craig Barclay, based out of New Jersey, primarily a soccer coach at the club and high school level, but also recently started coaching indoor and outdoor track with the throwers as well. I'm a physical education and health teacher as well.
And my name's Corinne Barrett. I currently live in Seattle, Washington, and I am a high school health and PE teacher. And I also coach JV and varsity level ultimate out here in Seattle. So today we are discussing injury prevention and risk management. And we're going to start off by discussing periodization models and how to talk about those with coaches. So Daniel, if you want to start off.
So this is something that I think I struggle with at the high school level. I think back to my personal training and when I was a little bit younger. Definitely having a system and knowing when to peak and when to rest and all that kind of great stuff that we're discussing. But that becomes very difficult with a high school sports team. Right now, I'm looking at 4 days from now will be April break for my student athletes, and half of them will be in Florida, half of them will be traveling somewhere else. So the all of the conditioning or the preseason stuff that we get into, suddenly they're like, "Hey, coach, I'm going to take 8 days off." And that doesn't necessarily fit into my plan for peaking at the end of the season. Also, one unique thing, and actually, Coach Barclay, you might be experiencing this right now. I started with most of my student athletes, probably 75% of them, in November.
Mhm.
The rest of them, they just joined me 2 weeks ago. So I have some students who are 4 months in, and I have some students who are zero. So being able to establish a program that meets all of their needs and gets them to perform at the level that I want them to 3 months from now, that's become something that's very challenging. I try to put out a whole season outline. I have my days laid out, and then within that, I'll have here's a break, here's picture day, here's prom, here's senior night, here's graduation, here's a home lacrosse game. Every time there's a home girls or boys lacrosse game, that field, the stadium field, is inside the track. I can't practice on the track because if a ball rolls across the track and one of my kids breaks an ankle, I can't do that. So suddenly I'm looking at weeks where it's 2 or 3 days of actual training. Do I condition the body? Do I do skills training? Do I do fundamentals because some are new, some are 4 months in? So this idea of periodization, I think it's incredibly important. I think it's something that I'd love to establish if I had year-round athletes, if I had season-long athletes. It's the best way to get the best results. But I think as a high school co-ed coach, um, my ability to do those things well are limited.
Yeah, when I was a player, it's obviously something you're probably going through yourself, but something I never really actually thought I was going through at the time. But now becoming a coach, and you have to really think about these things a lot more in detail. But you make a good point. There's so many different challenges that you have to meet, and soccer being my main sport, even within that, I coached the club level and the high school level. So they're two completely almost different entities. They have different sets of rules, to be honest. And the length of the game, the practice times, the amount of times we practice, all these things are completely different. So I've got to try and identify different ways of building a season long session, practice session for different groups of players. So, for instance, the high school level, I see them every single day for about 3 or 4 months, whereas the club players, I see them for maybe twice or three times a week, but for 9 months of the year. So within that is a lot of different unique challenges that we have to adapt and go around. And like you're saying there, with a high school level, um, sometimes I have half a field, sometimes I have a whole field, sometimes a quarter of the field, sometimes I have no field. So these are all different things you have to try and work around and with. But it's something I've definitely tried to really fix and I approach a better way over the last few years. It's something after doing this course, so I think I'll be in a better way to sort of move things and develop them moving forward. I think looking at the research, I've always kind of approached like a linear approach to periodization, whereas I've started basically at the beginning level and kind of worked my way up. But looking at the block cycle as well, periodization, that's something that maybe should try and focus on maybe a little bit more moving forward, especially for certain athletes. So that's something I do want to do a bit more research on myself to try and put in the best place because, as I say, you have to work with what you've got within the high school season, but it's definitely an area that I would like to improve my knowledge on. Because as a player, I just got on with it, but now as a coach, I really have to focus and make a better effort with all of that.
Yeah, just to add to that real quick, because you brought up the linear and block, I think one of the struggles as well is what you coach, right? So depending on what type of skill level you have as a head coach for track, where I don't just have throwers, I have my distance crew and my sprinters and my throwers and my jumpers. The training plan for the distance kid is going to be vastly different than the thrower, and one might have one type of training model that's better, definitely long term for distance, and the throwers are going to have something completely different, whether it's linear or block. You could have both of those models in one day for one different program versus the other, which makes it super challenging.
Mhm. We also bought the the Booster Club helped us raise a lot of money last year, 2 years ago. So we were able to purchase GPS trackers, and we used them for the first time last year. And I'll be honest, I wasn't 100% sure the best way to use them. So we strapped them on for every practice, for every game. But I think moving forward to next year, I'll have a much better knowledge of how to use them because we've now collected the data. So I now know my centre midfielder was able to run this distance per game using this many sprints, had this many impacts. So I now have that data that I can then sort of reverse engineer back into my practices that I never had the year before. So I'm excited to use all that and adapt it all, which I couldn't do the year before because kind of going in blind.
Yep.
That's definitely a good resource that I'm looking forward to incorporating in plans moving forward.
Yeah, I definitely am with you on the trackers. I'd love to be able to have trackers for my ultimate players. When I've been playing myself, not coaching, I have some friends who'll put the fitness trackers on their ankles or whatever, and they're realizing that they're basically running a half marathon when we have a whole tournament weekend. So it's really important to understand like how much each player is playing, how much they're sprinting, and all that. And I know as far as technology goes, I've also been trying to work on using that with statistics. So there's this great little app called Ulti Statistics, and other teams have used that. And I want to just work on adding more technology in. But I think the biggest problem that I'm having with my program for that is we just don't have enough coach bodies. Like sometimes it's only me coaching. Sometimes I have an assistant coach with me if they can make it. It's so much harder when you're by yourself doing it. But as far as periodization goes, I'm with you both. It is so tough for high schoolers. I think my biggest problem is the seasons themselves are pretty short, and they're also back to back with other seasons because Ultimate's year round, unlike other sports. So I have I have players who play in the fall in the BX season, and then they immediately have to jump into the mixed co-ed season in winter. Or I have players who are in the mixed season in winter who then play in the Women X season in spring immediately. So when we're talking about trying to kind of schedule this out so they're peaking at a certain time, it's great for maybe the first season because they'll peak at the end, but then suddenly they've peaked and they're in a whole new season where they're starting from scratch again. So I haven't quite figured out how to make that easier on my athletes. I'll be moving in the summer to a new state and starting possibly a new program, depending on what school I'm at. So I have a lot more flexibility. So I'm hoping to figure out how I can kind of adjust for these problems. I would say something that we haven't talked about too much yet with periodization is just how it relates to injuries. So our textbook talked about when someone's coming back from an injury, working on progressive loading, trying to periodize the reconditioning program. And I think that's something that I've also struggled with as a coach, because if a player gets an injury, we don't have athletic trainers to help support us, because we're considered a club rather than a sport. And it's hard trying to set up a program for a player by yourself and then hoping that they're going through it properly. And half the time, some of the kids don't even go see an athletic trainer or a doctor or anything. If they get injured, they're like, oh, I rolled my ankle, I'll do these things and then I'll be fine. And that can be a little bit tough. So I've been trying to figure out different ways to work around that for periodization. I don't know if either of you have any tips on dealing with that. I know you both get athletic trainers, so it's a little different.
Yeah, I think hearing your perspective on that is interesting, because I do the exact opposite. The minute I have any issues at all, I send them to the trainer. They're not allowed to come back until they're cleared from a primary care physician. So most of my efforts are in preventing any type of injuries. When I first started coaching, I definitely had, a lot of hamstring issues, a lot of hip flexor issues, a lot of ankle issues. And then I had to start really looking at, what am I doing or not doing to help prevent these injuries before they go see the athletic trainer. With my experience, and I know we'll get into this in a minute, when they see the athletic trainer, I can count on them being out for a solid 3 weeks before I get them back. So anytime they go to an athletic trainer, it's like season's over, or, I'm not going to have you for could be the whole season. The athletic trainer is kind of the doomsday person. If you go see them, you're done. You're definitely not coming back, because their rehabilitation programs are so extensive now. Our trainer will have them. They'll go through some assessment, and then they might have to ride a bike for 20 minutes one day. Day 2, they walk for 20 minutes. Day 3, they jog for 20 minutes. Day 4, they run for 30 minutes. It's several weeks before I get that athlete back, no matter what the injury is. So it's all preventative from the way that I look at it now.
Yeah, I will just add as well, the GPS tracker things, they are very, very time consuming. So I was doing everything. So I was charging them the night before. There was like 25 of them. So to charge them 25, it's 15 at a time. The next one, 10 had to go on. Then I had to be the one going and inputting all the data, downloading it all, and then printing off the sheet and then doing it. So it is very, very much time consuming as well with that. So I know what you're mentioning earlier. It's you could do with some more extra help, but it's what you try and do to help the kids see it and all. And within that as well, they all became competitive with each other as well, because they all wanted to beat each other's times. They all wanted to be the fastest kid out there. They all wanted to run the hardest and have the most sprints per game. They became competitive in a good way as well with it.
All right. Well, since we've been talking about athletic trainers specifically and how you both have one, I don't have one. I wish I had one because they're really important. We should talk a little bit about the new requirements for athletic trainers in terms of education and training. So what do you both think about that?
And so I was able to reach out to my athletic trainer. He's been there for a little while. He actually is quite a lot of experience working with the MLB and working with some hockey programs, baseball programs. He part-time works for a couple colleges in the area, so he's very knowledgeable. His discussion was kind of two. He thinks that the new requirements are a positive thing, but not necessarily in the short term. I think he was referring to going from a bachelor's degree to a master's degree, so a 5 to 6 year program, were a new requirement for him. And that was good, because there's going to be more demand for high quality athletic trainers, because his thought was there's going to be less people coming into the programs. And some colleges have already terminated the athletic training programs here in my state of Maine, because a lot of those students can choose to go to physical therapy or physician's assistant for nearly the same amount of school, with a much better schedule and much more money. So his thought is, that is difficult, and you're going to lose a lot of people coming into the programs. But for someone like him who's already established, it could increase his salary long run, because there's more demand and less people to fill those requirements. So that was his stance on it. I think right now, I looked at athletic training before going into physical therapy, or not, sorry, physical education. And I think for the salary that you make, 15 years ago, and the hours that you have, it's tough. And now you throw on, you got to have a master's degree to do that. I mean, I think almost anything in education right now, you need a master's degree. I know in my state, if you want to be just entry level teacher, you kind of have to have a master's degree. So I think that's the new norm. But to work from 2 to 7 or 8 at night, or every Saturday and every vacation, I don't know if I think it's worth it anymore. And he seems to be loving it. He's a young guy, but those were his thoughts.
Yeah, I spoke to my athletic trainer as well, and she kind of echoed a lot of the stuff that you were saying there. Uh, she actually wrote me a nice little letter with some of this stuff here, but she also said that she did think it was kind of good and bad with it. So for those who have to go and get a master's, you're obviously going to be more educated, and it's better for the student athlete themselves. So more knowledgeable, so they can give better treatments to the students. But the money side of things, she was also similar to your guy as well, saying that she thinks that there's about a $4,000 difference between somebody who has a bachelor's and who's a master, but the master itself obviously costs way, 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 way more than that. So you'll probably make your money back over a long time, but in the short term, you are going to lose out a little bit with it as well. She also made the point about she kind of compared them to EMTs. She said that an EMT is kind of like almost similar in some ways because they're both like first responders, they're both first people to give primary care, initial care. However, EMTs are only required to have a bachelor's degree. So she kind of mentioned that. They only need a high school degree. My bad, in New Jersey at least. So an EMT looks like they just need a high school diploma or a GED, which I thought was pretty interesting, to be honest. Yeah, so she said it was a good thing long term, and like the way everything's trending anyway, it is going to be something that people have to do. But financially, it was maybe not so good. And then, like you said about the hours that they put in, I know that my athletic trainer has a separate job in the morning where she works. She then comes to school, and she's there, like you say, until the last team finishes. If we have a team who has an away game, I don't know if this is unique to our school or not, but she is required to stay until that bus gets back to the school. And then once we're back, then she can leave. Again, I don't know if that's unique to our school or not, but that's the case for her. And holidays, weekends, she's always there. So she does make that point initially with it as well. Again, I'm not sure if that's just our school or not.
Yeah, I definitely can see it from both sides. Honestly, education in itself, it's pretty tough because, like you said, most forms of education, you need a master's now, or you need to get a master's at some point in order to continue on as a teacher or as an educator. But the pay is just not there. I was thinking about that even with this program. One of the reasons I'm getting a master's is to get a pay bump as a teacher. But in reality, it's the same thing. Like I might get 4,000 more each year, just pushing up into the pay scale. But the amount I'm paying for it, since I'm paying for it myself, is a little bit tough. And I agree with that for athletic trainers. I feel like the only way that it might balance out better financially for them is if they're going into athletic training for like a college or a professional team. Like they're going to get paid more there compared to what they're getting paid if they're working at a high school. One thing I do think, though, maybe instead of the master's as an alternative is doing continuing educational credits. I know some areas require that on top of a master's, but I think that could be a good idea to do like in lieu of a master's, like taking, maybe you're required each quarter, each semester to take like 1 or 2 courses just on something relating to athletic training, just to kind of keep yourself updated with newer trends within athletic training. And I think in some ways that could actually be better than a master's, because you're taking a master's and then you never have to maybe do continuing education credits after that, depending on the area. But if you just had to continuously take continuing education credits, then that would actually make them have more accurate current information about these newer trends. I'd say that something else to keep in mind with this is just that athletic trainers are so important and the hours are really tough. So, talking about needing a second job in the morning and then still coming and working those hard hours, like I know so many teachers that have it that way. And that's just a problem we have here in the US. They're just not paying educators enough. So, I'm not sure if they're going to continue to ask like athletic trainers to do all these extra things and not pay them for it if we're going to see a shortage of athletic trainers the same way we are right now with teachers. So that could be something really tough.
Yeah, I definitely saw our athletic trainer get way more responsibilities with the COVID pandemic. Suddenly, they have become the COVID management team at our school, where we're doing daily screenings with that individual. We're doing our testing results. All that stuff is going through our athletic trainer. The screening processes, everything's through the athletic trainer, which just seems odd that their role has, at my school at least, and really in our state, has molded into like they're the COVID response team as well as the athletic trainer, which definitely gives them way more power, which we'll talk about in a minute, but also a lot more responsibility, and the pay is not commensurate with that.
Do you all want to shift into talking about positive or negative experiences that an athletic trainer can have that maybe you've witnessed from your experiences?
Yeah, so I've had a couple different interactions with athletic trainers in different roles. I think just from the amount of sports that I've coached and the time that I've been doing it, I've definitely had good athletic trainers and not so great athletic trainers. I think it also really depends on the sport that you play. When I was coaching wrestling, um, the last person I wanted to see was the athletic trainer because there's something called blood time in wrestling. So if one of my students is injured on the mat in a minute and 30 seconds, if they don't take care of it, they forfeit the match. Athletic trainers come out and they want to analyze everything, check everything. And it's like, hey, the kid's got a bloody nose. Just, shove some cotton up there and call it good. But no, we got to check everything. So in that aspect, it's like my relationship with the athletic trainer was different. Now, as a track coach, it's more that rehabilitation. Like, how do I get this athlete back and ready to go? It's definitely my go-to person for any type of issues at all. Anytime a kid says anything about any ailment, they're going to the athletic trainer, and I think that's more of it. It saves my butt. I think after coaching for a long time, it's anytime someone says, "Oh, my leg's a little tight." If I continue to push them and then they pull their hamstring, now that's not so great for me. I'm going to have some angry parents. I'm going to have an angry athletic director. So the athletic trainer really just it covers me and it helps that kid. So, hey, go get checked out by this professional. We have someone here that knows a lot more than me. Let's see what they say. And that's been very, very helpful, especially with COVID stuff going on. Like, oh, what do I do about this result, that result? I'm coughing. Check in with the athletic trainer, make sure that they say it's good. And it really just, covers me. And it covers the kid. They know that, they're able to participate or they're not able to participate. So I think the type of sport that you coach and also the type of athletic trainer you have varies greatly. I've had some athletic trainers who are like, it's fine, and they throw them back in there, and then they get injured. Or I've had other ones who, again, like I said, you're out for 3 to 4 weeks, even if you just kind of rolled that ankle a little bit, and it's fine, and you're weight bearing, and well, no, we're gonna end your season. And it's like it's a short season, so it really depends on who you're working with and what sport you're in.
Yeah, I'd echo that as well. I've had a few different experiences, but mostly positive, to be honest. I mean, I walk past her office every day, and sometimes there could be like a ton of kids in that room. So I do feel for her. Like when the bell goes, when school finishes, everyone just kind of makes a beeline for her when there's so many sports going on. There's only one of her. But for the most part, I've had really good positive experience with her. I try to involve her as much as I can on a daily basis as well. Like for instance, at the start of the year, when we have like a parents meeting, we have like a dinner. I have herself and to talk a little bit about nutrition. And then every so often at practice, if we have like a If you have a game Tuesday, Thursday, for instance, on the Wednesday, if she has time for it, she might come out and like run a stretching routine with the players as well. Something that she's a lot more knowledgeable than I am. But definitely had some varying experiences when, like, the guy a couple of years ago just didn't want anything to do with it. He wasn't very personal at all. He was very dismissive. But this lady we have now is just great. She's great with the people, and she's actually helped me a lot with this particular course. She sent me a ton of different articles to help me with some of the previous assignments we've had. She wrote me like a huge email today to try and help me with this. And she even included a letter that a kid sent her who was one of my throwers, to say that the letter was basically saying she was initially intimidated by before going to the athletic trainer because she thought she would, by going there, be out for the season, like you mentioned. But because she was really like personal with her and helped her and talked her through it, she was a lot more willing to go and speak to her again in the future and encourage other people to do it. Simple things like saying hi as they walk past each other in the corridor, compared to the guys and girls who have known in the past, other trainers have known in the past who might not be as approachable. So for the most part, I've had really good experiences, but there have been one or two that are not so good. But I think if you get on well with them, it really helps everybody, if you're honest.
Yeah, it's almost as if athletic trainers should also be trained in their bedside manner. I'm not sure if that's part of their training in college. Like, I know as teachers, we had to train like how to interact with students and relationships and everything like that. But I'm hoping they also have some sort of training, the same way that doctors might. I would say I agree. Like, the way an athletic trainer interacts with players can maybe make or break their experience, because in college I had some really great athletic trainers where we could talk about anything. They'd be really understanding. They'd help like you through an injury. And then there are others that, like you said, are like really cold. And I know for ultimate specifically in college, there's some athletic trainers that like really took ultimate seriously, and others were just like not as about it because it's not considered a mainstream sport still. But I will say there's one experience where the athletic trainers were just like on top of it that I remember. And I think if they weren't there for this tournament, that like player could have had a completely different experience. But there was a player at a tournament I was helping work, because it was in the open division, which is men's basically. And they laid out for a disc and they broke their humerus, like they snapped it, which is like one of the hardest injuries to have ever. And it was just gnarly. And the athletic trainers were just like cool headed, good to go. They dove in, someone's already calling 911 to get the ambulance to come by and everything, but they just helped like stabilize everything. But I really appreciated how nice they were to the player. Like, they were comforting. They weren't just like doing their job, because I feel like any sort of athlete, when you're dealing with an injury, like, you just, all the emotions that are going through you are just, they're going to make you freak out. Like, is my season over? What happened? All this. And if somebody has like a better bedside manner, that can really make a difference. I'd say that's something that's really positive. So I'm hoping when I move and end up at my new school, I can try to develop a relationship with the athletic trainer. I think it may actually be considered a sport itself where I get access to them. But if I don't, then I want to see if there's maybe a workaround where they might be willing to still help out a little bit, or see if I can set that up with admin. And then going back to your wrestling comment, that's such a dangerous thing. I feel like they should fix that rule, because obviously if somebody gets injured during wrestling and you have to like rush them back on to play, otherwise they forfeit, that just sets players up not to take care of themselves with it when they have injuries, and it just puts players more at risk, in my opinion.
Yeah, that could be. They could have changed it by now. They've changed a lot of it, but
Okay.
people were using it as a strategy for a while. Same thing with shoelaces. Once upon a time, you were able to have shoelaces, but now you have to tape them and cover them up because you're getting your butt kicked, and suddenly your shoe comes untied. You're like, hey, I need a break right now, so
I see.
stop. So if someone is crying or someone is saying that their arms messed up and they have to stop the match because of it, it's a very high intensity sport during a 2-minute round. If you take a minute and a half off, 3 minutes off to get your win back, and then come back to it and kick the kid's butt, it becomes a strategy. So
that makes sense, actually.
and
That's rough.
if you're that injured, then you should forfeit and you should get off the mat. But if you're just, playing it, oh, my shoulder's bothering me, let me catch my breath. You got 90 seconds to take care of it.
Yeah. I guess coming up with some sort of way to like identify that. Like if a player's actively bleeding, I think that just means they should forfeit. Like don't stick like tampons up their nose or something. Just like
that's the
head
go-to.
out. That's it.
Tampons in the
honestly,
nose is the go-to.
Yeah, exactly. But just like the blood in general too. Like I feel like making sure, like especially like I was just teaching in health class the AIDS lesson, like explaining like how that all kind of gets passed around. And I just think back to like safety stuff for that could be a risk. So we have we're at 30 minutes now, and we've answered all the questions. I didn't know if anyone wanted to kind of add anything, if we want to kind of summarize what we've talked about so far to finish off the podcast.
I think that I'm very fortunate to have a athletic trainer on staff listening to Coach Barrett. And I think after, 12 years of coaching, I've kind of taken it for granted. And now it makes me think about, how much really they're covering my butt and my athletes' butts to make sure that they're getting the best season possible.
Yeah, for sure. I would echo that. And the coach in the high school and the club, I see it from both standpoints. I have an athletic trainer at high school all the time, and it's just me on the sideline at club. So I'd be desperate for somebody like that at the club side of things. So I really appreciate everything she does.
I agree. I'm hoping very much that I'll have access to the athletic trainer in an official capacity. But if not, I think this might be a time to just, I don't know, bake some baked goods and try to make friends with them. Because it's definitely been really tough not to have access to one here. All right.